Welcome to No Holding Back with me, Susan Estridge, the podcast where I bring you the biggest names from the worlds of media, politics, and law. We dive into unfiltered, unapologetic, and insightful conversations. At least we try. I speak my mind and I encourage my guests to do the same. No topic is off limits as we dive into the issues that shape our world. Today we have a very special guest, somebody I've known for a very long time because when he was a child, an infant practically, he was my editor at Creative Syndicate, where I write a syndicated column twice every week. Today, he's BBC's senior North American reporter. He's come a long way from editing me. He covers U.S. politics and cultural happenings across the continent. He joined the BBC in 2013 and has covered the U.S. Supreme Court, Congress, the technology sector, and Texas state politics for more than 100 news outlets during his career. Anthony was born in California, grew up in Texas, attended college in Washington, D.C. From presidential elections to pivotal policy debates, Anthony has been on the ground and in the thick of it, bringing audiences insightful analysis and expert commentary. He's all over Congress, all over the White House, all over the world. Anthony, it's such a pleasure to have you join us and to see you all grown up and doing so increbly well.
I know that seems like such a long time ago when I was
It
just
was a
starting to
long
edit. I was
time
right
ago.
out of college.
I know you were a baby, but you were terrific then, and I knew then that you would go on to do wonderful things.
Oh,
So,
well, thanks. It's editing insightful columnists like you that really gave me a foundation on which I rely on all the time covering politics now.
well, you do an amazing job of it. Anthony, what's going on right now? We're taping on Friday, March 14th, when Chuck Schumer has just come out and announced that he's going to join the Republicans and keep the government open. Young Democrats are apparently their anger boiling over, according to the New York Times. What's going on the Democratic side?
Yeah, it's a fascinating story. It's about 12:05, so just after noon here in Washington, D.C., and we're expected to get a vote in the Senate within the next hour or two that will start the ball rolling for approving that Republican plan that the House of Representatives passed to keep the government open through the end of September. The problem for Democrats with this is that funding mechanism wasn't just continuing along the funding levels from the past year, but it actually cut billions of dollars from social programs, added $6 billion onto defense spending. It made some changes to make it easier to spend money on border security. It also made it more difficult to rescind Donald Trump's emergency tariffs on Mexico and Canada. And it also is going to create some real budget headaches for the District of Columbia here for their local funding of services like trash collection, education, and law enforcement. So there were a lot of problems with it from the view of Democrats. The Democrats tried to block it in the House of Representatives. They didn't have the votes. All the Republicans stuck together. So they were hoping that Senate Democrats, even though they're in the minority, could use the filibuster parliamentary tactic to deny Republicans from being able to pass it there and use that power they had in order to negotiate something that was a little better for them. As you mentioned last night, Chuck Schumer, the Senate minority leader, announced that he thought a shutdown, which would happen if they didn't pass anything, would be worse for the country than approving this Republican piece of legislation, this Republican funding bill. And so he said he had grave misgivings about it, but that he would support it and that there would be enough Democrats in the Senate to support it, that it would pass and overcome that 60-vote filibuster pass tonight, and there would be no government shutdown. So yes, that is what's causing all the heartache and anger, not just among Democrats in the House of Representatives who tried to block this, but also in the grassroots of Democratic supporters across this country who have been clamoring for Democrats to do something to stop Donald Trump.
And why, here is one situation where they needed 60 votes to block a filibuster. And the Democrats have enough votes to deny them if they stuck together that 60 vote majority. So why did the Democrats cave? There aren't that many times where they have the opportunity to hold up the Republicans. On confirmations, it's 51 votes. You can't do a damn thing. Why are they
Yeah.
caving on this?
Well, I guess a lot of them felt, at least the ones who were going to support keeping the government open, they felt that this was a no-win scenario. On one hand, they uh, they're able to shut the government down, but shutting the government down doesn't help them. And in theory, conservatives would be perfectly happy with that. I mean, they don't want the government open. They're not really big fans of government services. So essentially, you're executing a hostage that they care not about at all. And in fact, Elon Musk has said that a government shutdown would help him further slash the government because it would identify the low priority or the non-essential government workers that he could just lay off once the government shuts down and never let come back to work again. So I mean that was a very real concern. But on the other hand, the other bitter pill they would have to swallow would be to go along with this Republican legislative agenda, the way they were making cuts through this funding bill and giving up the one piece of power they had. So I think it was kind of a no-win scenario. I mean, they were both bad options. Chuck Schumer decided that the lesser of two evils was to just let this go into effect. But I think when you talk about the dire situation, and when you hear from Democrats saying that this is a crisis and the Constitution's at stake, and then for them to not use the one piece of power they have, I think that definitely has angered a lot of people.
So what's going to happen? Where are people like Chris Murphy on this, who's emerged as the Democrat who's standing up and speaking out, and a lot of people think he should be replacing Chuck Schumer as leader. You hear lots of talk about that. My Facebook
Yeah.
page explodes with Murphy all the time. Where is he on this?
He's done a very good job of kind of giving voice to Democratic anger and opposition to Trump. He's been, out there speaking to rallies. He's been very vocal about what he sees as the gross violations of the Trump administration. Now, I haven't seen his particular statement on the continuing resolution, but I suspect that he would vote no on everything, and I think he would be one of the ones, along with people like Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, who are vehemently opposed to giving Republicans this win, even if it means a government shutdown. I mean, what they say is, well, they're already shutting down the government. The government shutdown started when Donald Trump took office and began
Yeah.
shuttering all these agencies. The USAID essentially doesn't exist anymore. The Department of Education, half the employees in the department now have been furloughed or outright fired, and all of their programs are being terminated. So what's the difference if you have a government shutdown now,
Well,
when what Donald
it's a
Trump is
good
doing is exactly the
question,
same thing? Yeah. Yeah.
I was asking myself the same thing. What's in the bill that's bad for Democrats, Anthony?
Well,
What are the cuts to social spending?
yeah, I mean, I haven't seen the details of where it cuts, and that may be up at the discretion of Trump and the executive branch. But they did outline, I think $8 or $9 billion worth of cuts to non-defense discretionary spending. So that means not Medicaid or Medicare or Social Security, but as government programs. So it could be things that the Department of Education runs, or it could be Health and Human Services. It could be all of these different agencies and the programs within them. And so I suspect that would be something where each individual department is tasked with cutting a certain amount. And I'm not sure, I haven't looked at the details of the bill, but I'm not sure it's spelled out in detail there. But there is definitely more money for the military, which is what hawks on the right wanted, and one of the reasons that they supported this in the House of Representatives. And that provision about the District of Columbia, it's kind of interesting because it's just a matter of how the District of Columbia's budget is run. DC, while it's still under the federal government, it has a certain amount of autonomy. It raises its own money from its own taxpayers, people who live in DC and pay property taxes and income taxes, and that money they use to fund services. But because a provision wasn't included in this bill that said that DC could use that, because they're on the new budget, and this would be using numbers from the old budget, essentially they have $8 billion that they've raised through their own taxpayers that, because of this technicality, they say they can't use to do things like pay teacher salaries, or pay policemen salaries, or pay for services like trash pickup and recycling and water. So they're scrambling, and they were on the Hill in force lobbying to try to get this changed. Republicans kind of shrugged their shoulder and said it wasn't going to be that big a deal. So I guess now that it looks like this is going to pass, we'll find out whether those dire warnings are true or not.
And what do they do if they are true? I mean, people live there, and a lot of those people are Democrats, and it
Yeah.
feels punitive. Maybe I'm wrong, but it certainly does feel punitive. Is it?
Yeah, I mean, and Republicans, while maybe they don't all live in D.C., they work there. I mean, if they see things start to fall apart in D.C., maybe they would step in and make some sort of a change in a week when they get back from their week off recess, and both the House and the Senate to tweak that once it becomes very obvious that it's having nasty consequences. I'm lucky I live across the river in Arlington, so I'm not going to be affected by this, but I have coworkers and friends who live in the District of Columbia who are very, very concerned that this could have adverse effects for, say, their child daycare programs. I know people who are getting laid off, people who are getting furloughed, people who are worried about getting fired, and now this on top of that. It's a very unpleasant time for people who work in and around the federal government and in the DC area, but you're out in California, there are people all over the country. This doesn't affect them as much, and maybe it doesn't break through as much, but it's very serious business for people here.
What's going on in the Democratic caucus in general, Anthony? It seems like the Democrats can't get themselves together to decide how to oppose this guy. They were wearing pink suits to his address to Congress. I thought that was one of the silliest things I've ever seen. I have a pink suit. I never wear it. I could have donated it. I mean, I didn't understand how that was an effective protest and waving placards in the air, and you had the one congressman banging on his cane. I mean, it made the Democrats, at least from where I was sitting in front of my TV, look silly.
Yeah, so the comedian Stephen Colbert after that held up the little placard that says "Do something" on it, and I think there's a lot of
Yeah.
sentiment among the Democratic base that they aren't doing anything or they're not doing enough. I mean, part of it is that they don't have power right now. They don't have control of either chamber of Congress. Obviously, they don't have the White House. The judiciary is, at least the Supreme Court and in several appellate courts, is very decidedly tilted against them. So what can they do? I mean, they can focus on messaging. They can try to rally the public, but right now the public seems much more interested in just tuning out and not facing the reality of this compared to 8 years ago when there was a much bigger groundswell of opposition to Donald Trump. They're fighting it in the courts, and you're seeing state Democrats, governors of states, and attorneys general in states filing lawsuits that are having some effect. They are getting judgments to block some of these cuts, some of these firings, and some of the policy changes that Donald Trump is trying to make. But as you know, Susan, the wheels of justice grind very slowly, and it
Right.
it doesn't give you quick wins, and it doesn't give you the kind of definitive victories that I think a lot of people are hoping for right now. But I'm racking my brain. I mean, maybe they could do more to directly reach out to the American public. Maybe they could do more to kind of wrest the megaphone away from Donald Trump. But Donald Trump is really good at dominating the news, and it makes it very, very difficult for anyone in the Democratic Party to break through and kind of capture the public's attention, particularly when there's no one just by the nature of their office that is positioned to lead the Democratic Party. Obviously, Chuck Schumer is not interested or up to the task. I was expecting more from Hakeem Jeffries actually in the House of
Yeah.
Representatives, but he hasn't been able to kind of capture the nation's attention as well either.
I saw a poll that said that 40% of Americans had no idea who Hakeem Jeffries even was. And so, it didn't bode well for him taking a leadership role. Who are the potential leaders, Anthony? You watch them all. Who are the governors, the senators that we should be watching? Because somebody's got to stand up to this guy and capture the national attention. The stock market is tanking. 401ks are going to hell. I mean, this is not good for people. The price of eggs, there were fights breaking out at Costco to get to the eggs. I mean, it's nuts. If Biden were president, they'd be going berserk over it. And
Yeah,
yet,
absolutely.
and yet Trump is president and he doesn't seem to be blamed for any of it.
Yeah, it does seem like Republicans did a much better job of messaging and breaking through when Biden was president, even when they didn't have control of Congress and they didn't have the White House and they just had a handful of governors. And I think part of that is that the conservatives have a much more well-developed, robust kind of a of a messaging of a media ecosystem with Fox News and with the various smaller conservative outlets. So I think that helps them. And when you talk about who's leading in the states, obviously folks like Josh Shapiro, the governor of Pennsylvania, Gretchen Whitmer, the governor of Michigan, Andy Beshear, the governor of Kentucky, Gavin Newsom, the governor of
Gavin
California.
Newsom, I got to tell you, is driving me absolutely out of my mind.
I
I
want to,
mean,
yeah, I can imagine. He's like tacking to the middle and hosting this podcast while all these kind of right wing, the Steve Bannons and Charlie Kirks of the world who are reviled by the left. I mean,
right.
I'm curious, what's he thinking there? I mean, that's not the kind of thing that wins you votes in a Democratic presidential primary.
No, I don't understand I mean, the transgender move was unnecessary. He moved to I don't know. I don't say he moved to the middle. I say he moved to the far right. What's he doing getting involved in transgender girls in sports? That's not an issue that is going to move him in the Democratic primary. And what's he doing with Steve Bannon on his podcast? I mean, I guess he's running for president, isn't he?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it seems like he's definitely going to run, and I don't know what the strategy is at this point, unless he's thinking, now when we're still several years off, is a good time to kind of inoculate himself from right-wing attacks. But boy, that does seem like putting the cart before the horse. I mean, right now you've got to think about how do you differentiate yourself from those other Democratic governors that I mentioned. Pritzker in Illinois is another one who are also positioning themselves for a presidential run, and it's going to be a very crowded field, and you have to appeal not just to centrists and people who think maybe the Democrats move too far to the left on social issues, who aren't necessarily the majority of the Democratic Party, but also the grassroots activists, the people who want a kind of a robust populist voice out there pushing back against the billionaires and the corruption that they see in Donald Trump's administration. And I'm not sure sitting down with Steve Bannon's going to move the needle on that.
I think it moves the needle in the wrong direction. I
Yeah,
don't know what the
yeah,
hell he's doing, and it's pissing people off in California. I'll say that. I don't see
yeah.
too many people who are getting around the Gavin Newsom flag. Meanwhile, we've got real problems in California if you'd like to deal with them. We've got a mayor who in Los Angeles doesn't have the confidence of the voters. We've got a governor who's busy running for president, and we've got, enormous problems. But I'll leave that by the wayside. What do you think of James Carville's advice that the Democrats can just do nothing and Trump will self-destruct? I don't see him self-destructing, is he?
Well, I can see a certain amount of logic in what James Carville is saying. If you view American politics as a pendulum that swings back and forth from the left to the right, then right now it's kind of tilting to the right with Donald Trump, and that there is going to be a natural rebound to that will move in the Democratic direction as Donald Trump pushes too far, gets too ambitious, that they do too much, or the economy sours, and then voters will just naturally look for an alternative. I mean, you kind of saw that with Joe Biden. The Democrats had the White House and Congress. The economy and inflation was up, and it wasn't necessarily because of anything that Donald Trump did during the campaign. It was more that he was the other guy, and he managed to run a campaign that positioned himself as a referendum on an unpopular president rather than an embrace of what Donald Trump was advocating. And so I think maybe Democrats and Carville hopes that will exactly be the same dynamic that we see in a midterm election for a second-term president, where historically the out-of-power party makes big inroads and gets a lot of support. So it is interesting. That's banking on the economy going south. It's banking on people being unhappy with Donald Trump, and you do have to sharpen your criticism of that so that they are the ones and Trump is the one who gets the focus of voter blame, because Donald Trump also is very good at blaming other people and making scapegoats
Very
and pointing
good.
the finger in other directions. And we saw him in 2018, not necessarily effectively, but he tried to make immigrants and the caravans and all of that much more of an issue in those midterm elections.
What do you think he's doing on the immigration issue right now with this? I mean, has the government overreached? They've got this guy, Khalil from Colombia, a student activist, a grad student who has been now with a green card arrested and put in confinement, can't talk to his lawyer. I mean, it seems to me I'm as sensitive to anti-Semitism as the next person, but I hate seeing them do this in the name of the Jews. As my mother would say, this is not good for the Jews. We
Yeah,
don't
yeah.
want them to squelch civil liberties in the name of anti-Semitism. Why is he doing this?
Yeah, I mean, it is remarkable. I mean, here's someone who is a naturalized resident of the United States. It's not someone who was just here on an education visa that could easily be revoked. It takes an immigration judge to make a finding of fact that he is a threat or he violated the law to start the ball rolling. And if the presidency and the State Department and Homeland Security has the ability to just take someone and hold them and move them across the country into a detention center and not, at least initially, let them have unfettered access to lawyers. I mean, that's really scary because there are a lot of people who live in this country who are not U.S. citizens, but who are green card holders, and none of them are safe. A lot of my colleagues are, British and are here with permanent residency, and it's disturbing to think that there's nothing between them and getting rounded up right now, except maybe a judge who, if you're lucky, will put some kind of injunction on it and some kind of keep them from being kicked out of the country. And it's by no means definitive yet. I mean, Mahmoud Khalil is still in detention, and his lawyers are still trying to get him out. So I guess the courts will fight over this. But again, I think the message has been sent, right? And I think that's what Donald Trump and this administration is trying to do. Even if ultimately a court says, no, you can't do that, and there has to be a process and all of this, the message has been sent. He was taken from his dormitory. He was moved across the country. He has been in this detention facility now for a week. It is going to have a chilling effect on anyone who is not a citizen and how active they want to be in expressing their political views. And I think that ultimately was the reason the Trump administration did this. Even if they don't win the ultimate legal battle on this, it's something that the message that they're sending is going to be very clearly received by people who are in this country.
And how does it play politically? I mean, it's chilling to me as somebody who's a law professor by training, watching them. They moved him to Louisiana so they'd be out of the Second Circuit and in the Fifth Circuit, so they get more conservative judges. Fortunately for Khalil, he had a lawyer who had already filed in New York, so the New York courts should have jurisdiction. But here's this person, his wife is 8 months pregnant, he's a student activist, and he's being prosecuted, as I understand it, under a law that says that the Secretary of State, in his sole discretion, can decide who's dangerous or not. I mean, that to me is dangerous in and of itself. Where is the
Yeah.
law in this?
Yeah, I mean that is it's pretty remarkable because if you think about it, then whoever is in power could, for non-citizens, decide whether they stay or go, and if there's no kind of judicial oversight, if there's no legal process beyond just, well, I said so, and he's sympathetic to Hamas. Well, what does that mean? And this person was
Exactly.
yeah, he's a spokesperson for the student protesters. As far as has been presented so far, he didn't break the law. He didn't vandalize property. He wasn't camping out, as far as I know,
Right.
in the quad. He was just the one. He was the face of a lot of these protesters, and so they're making an example of him. As far as what the public thinks, I mean, I'll be curious to see whether it's breaking through. I mean, obviously, it's a man with a foreign sounding name, and it's the protests at Columbia University were not viewed positively by a lot of the American public. Donald Trump has a base of support that's close to half this country, and they want him to do things to tamp down on the activism and punish the people who were disrupting public order. So they may be perfectly fine with it, but I think that really does fall on the media and on Democrats and others to explain exactly what the consequences of this mean. And just because it's a guy with a Muslim sounding name who is being detained doesn't mean that this couldn't happen to anyone here. I spoke with a woman, a 20-year-old tourist here in the U.S. From the U.K. She was from Wales, and she was backpacking across the country. And when she was doing this, she was using this service called Workaway, where you would stay with someone and then you would help out around the house and do some volunteer work, and then in exchange they would let you stay with them. Well, she tried to go into Canada and explain this to the Canadian officials, and they said, "Oh no, well you have to have a work visa in order to do that." Turned her around, sent her back into the United States. The United States said, "Oh, you're working here. Well, we're going to detain you." So this is a British tourist who has been in detention now in Tacoma, Washington, for a week and a half, living in a cell with 100 other people who have been detained in maximum capacity in this facility. And she wants to leave the country. She just wants to go home. But the government right now is not processing her. The judges are overworked, though they can't speak to anyone who can make a definitive decision. The British embassy is trying to get her out, but it just kind of is. This shows, how unsympathetic the system is right now, and how it does seem predisposed to putting people behind bars who are not citizens, and then not being in any rush to kind of sort out their situation. And I've heard stories about that involving German tourists and other people who have been Canadian tourists who have been detained and right now are trying to fight to get out of this detention system. It's a big net that is being thrown out there, and it is sweeping up a lot of people.
That's terrifying. And it's actually, as we would say, it's bad for the country. I mean, we need tourists. We want tourists to come here. And right now, the United States seems to be increasingly isolated in the world. I mean, you look at what's happening with Ukraine, with Europe, with, the Commonwealth countries, and the United States used to take the leading role in helping people around the world and standing up to communism. And now you've got Donald Trump embracing Putin at the expense of our allies. How do you explain that to the BBC?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of confusion and a lot of frustration, a lot of fear from other countries, people living in other countries, because obviously what the United States does affects the rest of the world and America's European allies. I think they knew things were going to change when Donald Trump was president, but they didn't think things would change this drastically, this quickly. And they're now just trying to figure out what the lay of the land is in global politics. I mean, you see European countries talking about how they can distance themselves from the United States and take on more of their defense responsibilities because they are not certain that America will be a reliable ally. I think when Donald Trump was elected 8 years ago for the first time, they viewed it as a blip. They viewed it as, well, this is just some sort of an electoral quirk and a hiccup. And when Joe Biden won, they felt that this confirmed that it was back to the way things normally run. But now that Donald Trump has won a second time and is moving so quickly to change U.S. positions internationally, that I think they understand that this is the new reality, and they are going to have to permanently adjust. It's not going to go back now. And the crazy thing is Donald Trump didn't campaign on annexing Canada. He didn't
Annexing
campaign.
Canada,
You
annexing
know,
Greenland, taking over
yeah,
Panama,
yeah.
global trade. What do you make of the global trade? I know we're running short of time, but what do you make of this global trade war he's launched? I mean, this is something that Republicans used to be against. I remember
Yeah.
when Republicans were the party of free trade, and it was the Democrats who were flirting with protectionism. But what has
Yeah.
happened?
I mean, it is a remarkable change in the position of the Republican Party over the past 10 years. And it was all because of Donald Trump. And I think it also is all because of what happened with George W. Bush and the Iraq War. And that definitely angered and alienated a lot of Republican voters who viewed this internationalism and making the world safe for democracy and all the kind of high-minded talk that George W. Bush had as being empty promises or being, promising America's blood and treasure to defend interests that really were not important to them. And so you saw Donald Trump essentially push back on all of that, and they went right along with him. He did obviously campaign on tariffs. He did campaign on getting a fair deal in his view with other countries, but also on using tariffs to bring in revenue. And so I think we're seeing that implemented, and that is something that shouldn't come as a huge shock, although the warnings of the economic consequences of what he was trying to do were certainly made very clearly by a lot of people. And now he's pressing ahead. And I think what's interesting is that a lot of people also thought that when the stock market started to dip and there started to be signs that tariffs and increasing tariffs enough in enough level to bring in real revenue for the government would have an adverse effect on the global economy, that he would back away from that and, oh my gosh, the stock market's dipping, okay, because he kind of did that the first time he tried to
Right.
put tariffs on Canada. But now it seems very different. He seems willing to push ahead and talk about short-term pain and a possible recession, and all of that is I think one of the reasons why the businesses are getting very nervous that maybe he means it this time, because he doesn't have to run for re-election. He's got 3.5 years that he's going to keep pushing ahead, even if there's some red flashing warning signs out there for the economy.
And how far can he go? I mean, how much freedom does he have? Like, I would think, I remember when Clinton was president, he was a good friend of mine. He was very sensitive to the stock market, and it drove him crazy, to be perfectly honest, that he used to say to me a bunch of investment bankers in New York could control the presidency of the United States. But most presidents are sensitive to the stock market going to hell and the prospect of a recession. Can Donald Trump just ignore those factors?
That's a good question. You're already seeing a lot of Republicans in Washington behind the scenes being nervous about this and starting to fret. But at least so far, they've stuck with Donald Trump. And I think, well, Donald Trump may decide that he can push ahead and tolerate a dropping stock market and try to hang this around Biden's neck and say that, the golden age is just around the corner. It's the Republicans in Congress who are going to have to stand for re-election next year who might be the first ones to try to put the brakes on this. So if you're going to watch anywhere, watch what Republicans start doing in Congress and whether they start trying to open up some distance between themselves and Donald Trump. And that might be what finally puts the brakes on this. Although, boy, they haven't shown much sign of that so far.
I was going to say, Anthony, where are the Mitt Romneys of the world? I mean, where are the Republicans with conscience? I remember when I worked in the Congress years ago, we used to have friends who were Republicans. We used to work across the aisle. We used to have respect for our Republican colleagues. There seems to be none of that. And right now, you don't hear any Republican voices standing up to Donald Trump.
No,
Are
there
there
aren't
any
many.
out there?
Yeah, there aren't many of them left. I mean, they've all been pushed out of office. Mitt Romney is back in Utah or wherever he spends his
Right.
winters, and you see people like Susan Collins and Lisa Murkowski of Maine and Alaska. They have been centrists who have voted against Donald Trump at times. Mitch McConnell, the former Senate minority and majority leader, is surprisingly has been kind of a voice of anti-Trump sentiment in the Senate. But I mean, that's the list. I mean, there just aren't that many other people who are willing to stand up to Donald Trump and break ranks with him because they're afraid of what it would mean for their political futures. I mean, Senator Bill Cassidy of Louisiana, who is up for re-election next year, and I think that's a big reason why he voted to convict Donald Trump in the second impeachment trial.
Right.
He is a doctor who has serious misgivings about some of Donald Trump's nominees, including RFK Jr. to head the Health and Human Services Department, and he came on board and eventually voted for Kennedy's confirmation. So I think that reflects they are under pressure and they are not willing to sacrifice their political careers because they still believe that Donald Trump can essentially ruin their lives and ruin their political fortunes if they cross him.
Elon Musk, Anthony, how much of their fear is due to the fact that Elon Musk is threatening to primary anybody who dares to vote against Donald Trump? How long can Elon Musk wield his billions in an effort to keep the Republican Party on its knees?
Well, when you're the richest man in the world, you can wield your billions for quite a long time. And that I think that does have an effect as well. I mean, the combination of Donald Trump and Elon Musk, the president of the United States, the most powerful man politically in the United States, and Elon Musk, the wealthiest man in the world, even with Tesla stock dipping a bit, that is a potent 1-2 combination. If you cross them, you will face a well-funded opposition candidate that has Donald Trump's base behind them, and that is very difficult to beat. And there are scalps on the wall that Donald Trump has put up there of people like Liz Cheney in Wyoming, who he was able to eject from the party when they crossed him. So it's not like they don't see what's happening and they don't know the political realities. And as long as Donald Trump's base sticks by him, I think that's going to be a very big power that Trump has over them. And as long as Elon Musk is willing to throw hundreds of millions of dollars into American politics, that also is going to have a very big impact on keeping the Republicans in line. Because as you saw with a lot of these confirmation votes coming into it, we thought, oh no, there's no way
No way
that.
he's going to get this one through.
Yeah, yeah,
That's what we
exactly.
thought. And he
Yeah,
got them
yeah.
all through.
You
I mean, with
got
the
them all
exception
through.
of what's his name, Matt Gaetz, who was a serial criminal, which of course
Right.
Trump is
Everyone
too.
hated Matt Gaetz in Congress. I mean, when they announced that he wasn't going to be seated in the House of Representatives, there were cheers in the chamber, and it wasn't just from Democrats.
No, no, they all hated him. One last question. How long can this Elon Musk Donald Trump partnership last? Do you hear any scuttlebutt about the tensions between them? And Donald Trump doesn't usually last that long with people who are potentially overshadowing him. Will Musk be different with his red Tesla on the White House lawn? I mean, is this a
Yeah.
marriage that's going to last?
Well, that's the big parlor game in DC right now is trying to figure out when the big break will happen. But there have been hints that have kind of set off increased speculation, such as last week when Donald Trump called the emergency cabinet meeting and he brought Elon Musk in, and there was a conflict between Marco Rubio and Elon Musk over cuts in the State Department, and another one over cuts with the FAA and in the Department of Transportation. Uh, and so people thought, well, Donald Trump is finally clipping his wings and saying that it's really the cabinet secretaries who make the final decision on cuts. But I wrote a story on that on Friday, and just as I was putting the finishing touches on the story, it's like maybe this is the beginning of the end for Musk. Got reports that Elon Musk and Donald Trump were getting on Air Force One together, and Elon Musk spent the entire weekend down at Mar-a-Lago with Trump, and then there was the Tesla promotional promotional video and
That
event on the lawn of the White House where Donald Trump was test driving Teslas and talking about how great they were. So every time we get a hint that maybe there's friction between the two, then we get three or four confirmations in the other direction that the two of them are still very tight. And Donald Trump respects money. He respects people who are successful in business. And obviously, when you measure someone by the size of their bank accounts, there's no one higher on the
no one
rankings than
stands
Elon Musk.
taller than Elon Musk, I
Yeah,
guess.
exactly. So it's an interesting kind of a partnership, and I don't see it fraying anytime soon, unless it really starts to adversely affect Donald Trump's popularity. But I feel like Donald Trump this time around, and it goes back to what we're saying about what would finally check Donald Trump and whether Republicans would finally turn on him, or would the stock market make him think twice. Like Donald Trump's won his second term. He's accomplished what he wanted to do. He's ended all the investigations into him. He has cemented his place in history. He's kind of removed the stain of that 2020 presidential loss on January 6th. He has rehabilitated himself. He's done what he wanted to do. So everything else now is gravy. He's not going to run for president again, despite some fears. I think he understands that he's done after 3 years. So those kind of checks on him, the consequences that he might normally be afraid of, they just aren't there anymore.
So, is there any last question, Anthony? Is there any check on him? What are you watching for in the coming weeks? Is there
Mhm.
any check, any balance, any court that he won't defy? I mean, what stops this man?
Yeah, I mean, we got to watch these court cases work through. I'll be curious to see if the Supreme Court steps in with this birthright citizenship appeals, the request to overturn the initial injunction to see, if that could be a hint of how active the Supreme Court wants to be in trying to help Donald Trump out. And these cases, they'll move through the judicial system. Those are going to be the ones that ultimately decide how much power Donald Trump has. Like I said, watch Republicans in Congress, see if they start getting nervous as the stock market keeps dipping and as their constituents keep feeling the brunt of government cutbacks and government services being mismanaged or poorly run, and that makes people start to feel what's going on in Washington on a personal level outside of the DC area. That's something to watch. But otherwise, the main thing is elections, and they're still a long way off. We've got a governor's race here in Virginia that will obviously draw a lot of attention and heat that will give Democrats a chance to start removing the bad taste from their mouth from last year's election. We've got midterms that will, before a year from now, we'll be talking about them, and it'll start being energizing the Democrats because they can feel they can do something, and then before you know it, it'll be, people will start actually throwing their hand into the presidential contest, and we'll see, Democrats will finally have a chance, and Democratic voters will finally have a chance to kind of pick a voice for them and determine what direction they want to go, because they're going to have a lot of options. They're going to have centrists, they're going to have populists, they're going to have people who have a very kind of ambitious liberal agenda. There are going to be others who want to move the party to the center. So that'll be when the soul searching finally has some kind of a definitive result.
That's a long time away.
It is a very long time away.
And there's a lot of damage that can be done and a lot of stories you're going to write. I'm going to follow them. Anthony Zurcher, it has been a pleasure to talk to you. You are such an able and capable and smart and insightful reporter. It's terrible to see the attack on the media that's going on with this administration. And just, I can only say you keep at it, right? Keep doing
I will do my best, Susan.
Okay, well, I know you will. If you enjoyed the show, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can listen to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also watch every episode on our YouTube channel. Please leave a rating and review on your chosen platform. It really helps us reach more listeners and keep the conversation going. Follow us on X or Twitter at No Holding Back FM. And for my weekly column, visit our website, estridgegolden.com. Thank you so much to Anthony Zurcher for joining me. Thank you all for listening, and I'll see you next time on No Holding Back.